Karen Pritchard's voice was confident and dismissive. "I'm conducting an inspection. Several residents have expressed concerns about the condition of your property. As HOA compliance officer, it's my responsibility to ensure that structures in the area meet safety standards. Like breaking into a locked root cellar with a crowbar could be called an inspection. Like claiming community oversight could override the fact that she'd forced open my door without permission, without a warrant, and without jurisdiction. What she didn't know was that I had security cameras recording her breaking in at 10:18 m, and that her own journal documented her plan to claim my cellar through adverse possession. This wasn't a safety inspection or community concern. 5 acres of rural Tennessee property, stone root cellar built in the 1940s, an HOA compliance officer who'd trespassed 3 times before I caught her, documented my belongings in 60 photos, and refused to leave when confronted. Karen made the mistake every HOA officer makes, assuming that her title gave her authority over properties outside her jurisdiction and that community safety justified breaking and entering with a crowbar. It didn't. Over 6 months, I watched Karen Pritchard discover what happens when you break into someone's property with a crowbar, lie to police claiming you were trapped for hours when it was 17 minutes, and sue for $150,000 while security. Footage proves every word you said was false. This is the story of how an HOA compliance officer lost her position, her home, and cost herself $22,000 because she couldn't answer one question the judge asked. "Why did you bring up a crowbar if you thought the door would be unlocked?" Not because I wanted to destroy her. Because property law doesn't care about your title or your intentions. It cares about trespassing, breaking and entering, and what happens when you refuse to leave someone else's property. But let me start from the beginning. Before we dive into, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. And don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more interesting stories just like this. I live on 5 acres in rural Tennessee, about 40 minutes outside of Nashville, on a property that's been in my family since the 1940s. The land isn't fancy, mostly wooded, with a small clearing where my house sits, a gravel driveway, and a few outbuildings that have been here longer than I've been alive. There's an old barn my grandfather built in 1952, a tool shed from the 60s, and a root cellar that dates back to the original homestead. The root cellar is my favorite structure on the property. It's built into the side of a low hill behind. The house stone walls, a heavy wooden door with iron hinges, and stone steps leading down into a cool, dark chamber about 12 feet by 8 feet. The ceiling is arched stone, reinforced with old timber beams. The floor is packed earth. My grandmother used it for canning shelves lined with mason jars of tomatoes, green beans, pickles. After she passed, my parents used it for storage. Now, it's mine, and I use it the same way, storing canned goods, root vegetables, emergency supplies, tools I don't need regular access to. It's functional. It's private. It's on my property. My neighbor Karen Pritchard didn't see it that way. Karen lived about a quarter-mile down the road in a newer subdivision. It's called Meadowbrook Estates, a cluster of 40 homes built in the early 2000s with an HOA, covenants, and strict rules about lawn maintenance, fence height, and mailbox design. My property wasn't part of Meadowbrook Estates. I was outside the HOA boundaries, on land that had been here decades before the subdivision existed. But that didn't stop Karen from treating my property like it was under her jurisdiction. Karen was the kind of neighbor who measured your grass height from the road, took photos of your trash cans if they were visible past 7 p.m., and called the county if your shed looked unpermitted. She'd been making comments about my property for over a year. "Your driveway is full of potholes. It's an eyesore. That old barn is falling apart. Someone could get hurt. You really should clean up all those outbuildings. They look abandoned." I'd ignored her. My property was mine to maintain, or not maintain however I wanted, as long as I wasn't violating county code. And I wasn't. But Karen didn't let it go. On April 23rd, I left the house around 10 a.m. to run errands in town groceries, hardware store, post office. I was gone about 2 hours. When I pulled back into the driveway just after noon, I noticed Karen's silver Honda CR-V parked on the shoulder of the road near my mailbox. That was odd. Karen never visited. She barely acknowledged me when we passed each other on the road. I parked near the house, grabbed the grocery bags from the truck, and carried them inside. As I was putting things away in the kitchen, I heard a noise. A faint, scraping sound. Metal on stone. I stopped listening. The sound was coming from outside. From the direction of the root cellar, I set down the groceries and walked to the back door. Stepping out onto the porch, the root cellar door was open. I stared at it, my mind processing what I was seeing. The door was heavy solid oak, at least 3 inches thick, with iron hinges and a heavy iron latch. I always kept it closed, locked. But now it was standing open, the latch hanging loose. I walked toward the cellar, my pulse quickening as I got closer. I could hear movement inside, footsteps. The sound of something being moved. I stopped at the top of the stone steps and looked down into the cellar. Karen Pritchard was standing in the middle of the room, holding her phone, taking pictures of the shelves. She was wearing khaki pants, a white blouse, and a lanyard around her neck with an ID badge that read Meadowbrook Estates HOA, Compliance Officer. I stood there for a moment, too stunned to speak. Karen looked up and saw me. She didn't flinch, didn't look guilty. She just lowered her phone and said, "Oh good, you're back. I need to talk to you about these code violations. What are you doing in my root cellar?" I said, my voice tight. "I'm conducting an inspection," Karen said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Several residents have expressed concerns about the condition of your property. As HOA compliance officer, it's my responsibility to ensure that structures in the area meet safety standards. This isn't HOA property. It borders HOA property. And these old structures pose a risk: fire hazards, structural collapse, pest, infestations. I'm documenting everything so we can file a formal complaint with the county." I stepped down into the cellar. "Get out." Karen didn't move. "I have every right to ensure you're not creating hazards that could affect the surrounding community." "No," I said slowly. "You don't. This is private property. You're trespassing. I'm performing a safety inspection. You broke into my root cellar without permission, without a warrant. That's called breaking and entering." Karen's expression hardened. "I didn't break anything. The door was unlocked." That was a lie. "I'd checked the lock 2 days earlier when I'd stored a case of canned tomatoes. The latch had been secure." "Get out of my cellar," I said. "Now." Karen raised her phone and started taking more pictures. "I'm not leaving until I've completed my documentation. You can file a complaint if you want, but I'm within my rights. You're not within your rights. You're trespassing. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." Karen turned to face me, her voice rising. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll show them the photos. This place is a death trap. Those beams are rotting. The shelves are unstable. You're storing flammable materials in an unventilated space." I turned and walked up the stone steps, out of the cellar. Karen called after me. "I'm not finished." I reached the heavy wooden door and swung it shut. The iron latch clicked into place. I pulled the padlock from my pocket, the same one I always used, and snapped it through the latch. Karen's voice came through the door, muffled but loud. "What are you doing?" I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The door shook as Karen pounded on it from the inside. "Open this door. You can't lock me in here," the dispatcher answered. 911. "What's your emergency?" I spoke calmly, clearly. "I have a trespasser locked in my root cellar. She broke into my property without permission. I've secured her until police arrive. I need an officer sent to my address." Karen's voice rose to a scream. "Let me out. You can't do this." The dispatcher asked for my address. I gave it. She confirmed an officer was en route. "How long until they get here?" I asked. "Approximately 15 minutes, thank you." I ended the call and sat down on the porch steps, my phone in my hand, listening to Karen bang on the door and scream. "This is illegal. You're assaulting me. I'm calling my lawyer." I didn't respond, because Karen Pritchard had broken into my property. She'd forced open a locked door. She'd entered a private structure without permission, and when I'd told her to leave, She'd refused. Under Tennessee law, I had every right to detain a trespasser until law enforcement arrived. So that's exactly what I did. I sat on the porch steps and I waited for the police. While Karen Pritchard screamed from inside the root cellar, she'd broken in too, demanding to be let out of the trap. She'd walked into herself. The sheriff's deputy arrived exactly 14 minutes after my 911 call. A white SUV with Williamson County Sheriff painted on the side, rolling up my driveway. With lights flashing, but no siren, I stood up from the porch steps as the deputy parked and stepped out. He was in his mid-40s, solidly built, with close-cropped gray hair, and a name tag that read Deputy M. Carson. From inside the root cellar, Karen was still screaming, "Help! I'm locked in here. He assaulted me." Carson looked at me, then at the cellar door, then back at me. "You the homeowner?" "Yes, sir. Ben Cassidy. And that's the trespasser." "Yes, sir. Karen Pritchard. She broke into my root cellar. I told her to leave. She refused. So I locked her in and called you." Karen's voice came through the door, louder now. "That's a lie. You locked me in here. I've been trapped for hours." Carson walked toward the cellar door. "Ma'am, this is Deputy Carson with the Williamson County Sheriff's Office. I need you to calm down. Arrest him. He assaulted me. He locked me in a death trap." Carson looked at me. "How long has she been in there?" Checked my phone. 17 minutes. "Since I called 911? Carson raised an eyebrow. "She said ours. She's lying." Karen pounded on the door. "Can't breathe. This place is unsafe. Let me out." Carson stepped closer to the door. "Ma'am, are you injured?" "No, but I could be. This structure is dangerous. Can you breathe?" A pause. Then, quieter. "Yes. Then I need you to calm down. I'm going to open the door, and we're going to talk." "Understood?" "Yes. Just get me out of here." Carson looked at me. "You have the key?" I pulled the padlock key from my pocket and handed it to him. Carson unlocked the padlock, lifted the latch, and pulled the door open. Karen came up the stone steps. Like a hurricane, red face, furious, pointing at me. "Arrest him. He locked me in there. I could have died." Carson held up a hand. "Ma'am, I need you to take a breath and step back. He assaulted me. Did he touch you?" Karen hesitated. "He locked me in. Did he physically touch you?" "No. But then he didn't assault you. Now step back and let me do my job." Karen glared at me but took a step back, her chest heaving. Carson turned to me. "Walk me through what happened." I explained. I'd left the house around 10 a.m., returned just after noon, heard noises from the root cellar. Found Karen inside taking photos. I'd told her to leave. She'd refused. I'd locked her in and called 911. Carson made notes on a small pad. "Did you give her permission to enter the cellar?" "No." "Had she ever been given access to this property before?" "No." Carson turned to Karen. "Ma'am, why were you in the cellar?" Karen straightened, her voice regaining its confidence. "The HOA compliance officer for Meadowbrook Estates. I was conducting a safety inspection. Does this property fall under HOA jurisdiction?" "It borders HOA property." "That's not what I asked." "Is this property part of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA?" Karen's jaw tightened. "No, but as a compliance officer, I have a responsibility to ensure nearby properties don't create hazards that could affect our residents." Carson's expression didn't change. "Did you have a warrant to inspect this property?" "I don't need a warrant for a safety inspection." "Yes, ma'am, you do." "Did you have the homeowner's permission to enter the cellar?" "I have implied access implied." "Access isn't a legal term." "Did you have explicit permission from Mr. Cassidy to enter his property?" Karen crossed her arms. "No," Carson wrote that down. "So you entered a locked structure on private property without permission and without a warrant. It wasn't locked." "The door was open," I interrupted. "That's not true. The door was locked. I checked it 2 days ago." Carson looked at Karen. "Ma'am, did you force the lock?" "The door was open when I got here. That's not what I asked. Did you force the lock?" Karen's face flushed. "I may have adjusted the latch, only because I needed to ensure the structure was safe." Carson closed his notebook. "Ma'am, turn around and put your hands behind your back." Karen's eyes went wide. "What? You're under arrest for criminal trespass. You can't arrest me?" I was performing my duties as an HOA officer. You don't have any authority on this property. You entered without permission. That's trespassing. Turn around. This is insane. I'm the victim here. Carson's voice hardened. Turn around now. Karen turned, her face red with fury, and Carson cuffed her hands behind her back. You have the right to remain silent. ... As Carson read Karen her rights, she glared at me over her shoulder. You're going to regret this. I'm suing you for false imprisonment, for assault, for emotional distress. My lawyer is going to destroy you. I didn't respond. Carson led Karen to his patrol vehicle, placed her in the back seat, and returned to where I was standing. I'll need you to come to the station tomorrow to file a formal statement, Carson said. I'd recommend installing security cameras if you don't have them already. This kind of thing tends to escalate. I have cameras, I said. I'll pull the footage tonight. Carson nodded. Good. Bring it with you tomorrow. If she forced that lock, we're looking at breaking and entering. Not just trespass, Karen was released on bond 3 hours later. By 6 p.m., the story had spread. Through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire, Karen's version went up on the neighborhood Facebook page within an hour of her release. Post April 23rd, 6:47 p.m., I was falsely arrested. Today, while performing my duties as your HOA compliance officer, I went to inspect a dangerous structure on a property bordering our community, a root cellar that poses a serious safety hazard. The owner trapped me inside for over 2 hours in a dark, unsafe space with no ventilation. I was terrified. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. When police arrived, they arrested me instead of him. This is an outrage. I am consulting with my attorney about filing charges for false imprisonment and assault. Please share this post. This man is dangerous, and he needs to be held accountable. The post had 47 comments within 20 minutes. Most of them supported Karen. This is horrifying. How is he not in jail? You were just trying to keep us safe and he locked you in a cellar. That's psychotic. I'm calling the sheriff's office tomorrow to file a complaint. This is unacceptable. We need to organize a neighborhood watch. Man is a threat. Few people pushed back. Wait, did you have permission to be on his property? If the cellar was so dangerous, why did you go inside? But those comments were quickly drowned out. The next morning, the local news picked up the story. The segment aired on the 6 a.m. broadcast. Woman arrested after alleged entrapment in root cellar. The reporter stood in front of my property on the road just outside my driveway and summarized the incident. 47-year-old Karen Pritchard was arrested yesterday for criminal trespass after entering a root cellar on this rural property. Pritchard, who serves as HOA compliance officer for the nearby Meadowbrook Estates community, claimed she was conducting a safety inspection when the property owner locked her inside and refused to let her out for over 2 hours. The segment cut to an interview with Karen, recorded outside her home. Reporter, Ms. Pritchard, can you describe what happened? Karen, I was inspecting an old root cellar on a property near our community. The structure is unsafe. Fire hazards, no ventilation. I went inside to document the violations, and the owner came home and locked me in. I was trapped in complete darkness for hours. I couldn't breathe. I was terrified. And when police finally arrived, they arrested me instead of him. Reporter, why were you on his property without permission? Karen, as HOA compliance officer, I have a responsibility to ensure that nearby properties don't create hazards for our residents. This man's property is a disaster. Instead of thanking me for trying to help, he had me arrested. The segment ended with the reporter stating that I had declined to comment. That part was true. I'd ignored 3 calls from the news station that afternoon. I sat down at my computer and pulled up the security camera footage. I had 4 cameras. On the property, 1 at the driveway entrance, 1 covering the front of the house, 1 at the barn, and 1 facing the root cellar. I opened the file from the root cellar camera and scrolled to 10:18 a.m., about 10 minutes after. I'd left for town. The footage was clear. Karen Silver. CRV pulled up to the edge of my property and parked on the shoulder of the road. Karen got out, looked around, and walked onto my property, carrying a canvas bag. She approached the root cellar door. examined the lock, and pulled something out of the bag. A crowbar. I paused the footage and zoomed in. Karen inserted the crowbar into the gap between the door and the frame, just above the latch, and pried. The wood splintered. The latch popped open. She set the crowbar down, pulled the door open, and disappeared inside. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Karen hadn't found the door unlocked. She'd forced it open, with a crowbar that wasn't. Trespassing. That was breaking and entering. I saved the footage to a USB drive and called Deputy Carson. "I have the security footage," I said. "You need to see this." Deputy Carson came by the house the next morning at 8 a.m. to review the security footage. I'd already copied it to a USB drive, but he wanted to watch it on my computer to verify the timestamp and the full sequence of events. We sat at my kitchen table, the laptop between us, and I played the footage from 10:18 a.m. Carson watched in silence as Karen pulled up to my property, got out of her car, walked to the root cellar with a canvas bag, pulled out the crowbar, and forced the lock open. When the footage ended, Carson leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. She lied to me. She said the door was unlocked when she arrived. It wasn't. Carson made a note in his pad. This changes things. Breaking and entering with a tool, that's not simple trespass. That's burglary under Tennessee law. What happens now? I'm forwarding this to the DA's office. They'll review it and decide whether to file additional charges. Should also get an attorney. If she's threatening to sue you, you need someone representing your interests. I was planning on it. Carson stood. One more thing, send me a list of everything stored in that cellar. If she took anything, we add theft to the charges. I hired an attorney that afternoon, criminal defense and property rights lawyer named Rachel Kemp. She had an office in Franklin, about 20 minutes from my house, and she'd been recommended by a friend who'd used her in a boundary dispute case. Rachel was in her late 30s. Sharp, direct, and unimpressed by Karen's story. "She broke into your cellar with a crowbar," Rachel said, reviewing the footage I'd brought. "You locked her in and called the police, under Tennessee Code annotated section 3911614. You had the legal right to detain a trespasser using reasonable force to prevent them from fleeing until law enforcement arrived. Locking a door isn't assault. It's securing a crime scene. She's threatening to sue me for false imprisonment. Let her. She'll lose. You can't claim false imprisonment when you're caught committing a crime." Rachel closed the file. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we file a criminal complaint with additional charges: breaking and entering, criminal trespass, and if she touched or took anything in that cellar, attempted theft. Second, we prepare for her civil suit. If she actually files, we'll counterclaim for property damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. She damaged the lock and the door frame. Good. Get an estimate for repairs. We'll include that on April 28th, 5 days after the incident. Karen filed a civil lawsuit against me in Williamson County Circuit Court, Pritchard v. Cassidy claims. False imprisonment, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, damages, sought $150,000. The complaint was 12 pages long, dramatic, and full of exaggerations. Karen's version of events. According to the lawsuit, plaintiff Karen Pritchard, acting in her capacity as HOA compliance officer, entered an unsecured root cellar on defendant's property to conduct a safety inspection. Upon discovering plaintiff inside, defendant became enraged, refused to allow plaintiff to leave, and forcibly locked her inside a dark, unsafe structure for over 90 minutes. Plaintiff was unable to breathe, feared for her life, and suffered severe emotional distress as a result of defendant's malicious actions. The lawsuit claimed I had assaulted her by locking the door, that the cellar was structurally unsafe and posed an immediate risk of collapse, and that I had intentionally inflicted emotional harm by refusing to release her. Rachel read the complaint and laughed. 90 minutes. She was in there for 17 minutes. And she's claiming she couldn't breathe in a ventilated stone cellar. Can she win? No, but we still have to respond, and we're countersuing. Rachel drafted a motion to dismiss Karen's claims and filed a counterclaim for property damage, broken lock, damaged doorframe, $850 legal fees and costs, $12,000 estimated emotional distress caused by false accusations and harassment, total. Counterclaim $25,000. The local media picked up the lawsuit story immediately. The headline in the Franklin Review read, HOA officer sues neighbor for $150,000 after being locked in root cellar. Karen gave another interview, this time to a local TV station. Reporter, Ms. Pritchard. Yes. You're suing your neighbor for $150,000. Can you explain why? Karen, I was conducting a routine safety inspection, something I do regularly as HOA compliance. Officer, I was concerned about the structural integrity of an old root cellar on his property. When I went inside to inspect it, he came home, saw me, and became violent. He locked me in that cellar for over an hour and a half. I was in complete darkness. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die. Reporter, he says, you broke into his property with a crowbar. Karen's expression hardened. That's a lie. The door was unlocked. I didn't break anything. He's trying to cover up what he did by making me look like a criminal. Reporter, but you were arrested for trespassing. Arrest was a mistake. The deputy didn't have all the facts. Once the truth comes out in court, everyone will see that I was the victim here. Discovery began in June. Rachel subpoenaed Karen's phone records, text messages, emails, and any photos or videos she'd taken on my property. What we found was damning. Karen had taken over 60 photos inside the root cellar, not just of the structure, but of my belongings. Photos of the shelves. Photos of the mason jars. Photos of the tools I stored in the corner. Photos of boxes labeled tax records, 2019 to 2023. Photos of a filing cabinet I kept in the back corner. She hadn't been inspecting for safety violations. She'd been cataloging my property. Rachel also requested Karen's HOA records meeting minutes, emails, communications with other board members. We found an email Karen had sent to another HOA board member 3 weeks before the incident. Email April to and from Karen Pritchard to Linda Hayes, HOA board member. Subject, storage solution. Linda, I've been thinking about our storage problem for HOA equipment, holiday decorations, event supplies, etc. I noticed the property next to ours, the Cassidy place, has an old root cellar that looks completely unused. It's just sitting there gathering dust. If we could access it for storage, it would solve our space issue. I'm going to reach out to the owner and see if we can work out an arrangement. Karen, there was no follow-up showing she'd ever contacted me. Karen's deposition was held on July 15th at Rachel's office. Karen arrived with her attorney, a man named Gerald Fosterand, sat across the table from Rachel. Her arms crossed, her expression defiant. Rachel started with easy questions. Karen's role as HOA compliance officer, how long she'd held the position, her responsibilities. Then she shifted. Rachel, Ms. Pritchard, on April 23rd, you entered Mr. Cassidy's root cellar. Karen, I was conducting a safety inspection. Rachel, had you inspected this property before? Karen hesitated. Rachel, had you ever been on Mr. Cassidy's property before April 23rd? No. Rachel, did you contact Mr. Cassidy to request permission to inspect the cellar? No, Rachel. Why not? I didn't think it was necessary. It's a public safety issue. Rachel, but the property isn't under HOA jurisdiction, is it? Karen's jaw tightened. No, but as a compliance officer, I have a responsibility, Rachel. To inspect properties outside your jurisdiction without permission? Karen didn't answer. Rachel slid a photo across the tabula still frame from the security footage showing Karen using the crowbar to pry open the lock. Rachel, do you recognize this image? Karen stared at it, her face paling slightly. Rachel, it's a photo of you forcing open a locked door with a crowbar, is that correct? The door was stuck, Rachel. The door was locked. You forced it open. Breaking and entering. Karen glanced at her attorney. Foster leaned forward. Don't answer that. Rachel moved on. Miss Pritchard, you took over 60 photos inside the cellar. What were you documenting? Safety violations. Can you explain why you photographed Mr. Cassidy's tax records? Karen blinked. I didn't. Rachel slid another photo across the table. One of Karen's own photos, showing a box labeled Tax Records 2019 to 2023. This is a photo you took. Why were you photographing his personal documents? Karen's voice dropped. I was documenting the contents of the space. Rachel, why? To show that the space was being used improperly, Rachel, or to see if you could use it yourself. Karen's face flushed. It's ridiculous. Rachel slid the April 2nd email across the table. This is an email you sent to another HOA board. Remember, 3 weeks before you broke into the cellar, you wrote that you wanted to access Mr. Cassidy's cellar for HOA storage. Did you ever contact him to ask permission? Karen didn't answer. Rachel, did you, Ms. Pritchard? No. So you wanted access to his cellar for your own purposes, and when he didn't offer it, you broke in. That's not what happened.
Then what?
Did happen? Karen's voice was tight. I thought the space was wasted. It's just sitting there unused. We needed storage. It seemed reasonable. Rachel let the silence hang. 2 weeks after the deposition, Deputy Carson called me. We got a warrant to search Karen's home. Found something you need to see. He sent me a scanned image, a page from a journal, handwritten in Karen's handwriting. Journal entry, March 18th. The root cellar on the Cassidy property is perfect for storage. It's clearly abandoned. He never uses it. If I can start storing HOA equipment there without him noticing, we might be able to claim adverse possession after a few years. Worth exploring. I stared at the entry, reading it 3 times. Karen hadn't just wanted temporary storage. She'd been planning to claim ownership of my cellar through adverse possession. Rachel's voice was calm when I called her. That's intent. That's premeditation. She wasn't conducting a safety inspection. She was scouting the property to see if she could take it. Can we use this? Absolutely. This destroys her false imprisonment claim. She broke in with the intent to unlawfully occupy your property. You had every right to detain her. Karen Pritchard had broken into my root cellar with a crowbar. She'd photographed my belongings, planned to use my property for her own purposes. And when I'd caught her, she'd lied to the police, lied to the media, and sued me for $150,000. But the evidence didn't lie. The security footage didn't lie. And her own, it's journal written in her own handwriting, didn't lie. Karen had gambled that. I wouldn't have proof she was wrong, and now she was about to lose everything. Rachel scheduled a meeting at her office on July 22nd to go over the evidence we'd compiled for both the criminal case and the civil trial. She'd laid everything out on the conference table in organized folders. Security footage, Karen's journal entries, text messages, photos, emails, and the false police report Karen had filed. This is one of the strongest cases I've seen, Rachel said. Karen didn't just trespass. She planned it, executed it, lied about it, and then tried to sue you for stopping her. Every piece of evidence we have contradicts her story. She opened the first folder, the security footage. The footage from my root cellar camera, was the foundation of the case. Rachel had it compiled into a single video file, time-stamped and annotated. 10:18 a.m., April to 3 hoakaren silver. CRV pulls up to the edge of my property. She parks on the shoulder, gets out, and looks around, checking to see if anyone is watching. She walks onto my property carrying a canvas bag. 10:20 a.m., Karen approaches the root cellar door. She tries the latch. It doesn't open because it's locked. She sets down the bag, pulls out a crowbar, and inserts it into the gap between the door and the frame. She pries. The wood splinters. The latch pops open. 10:21 a.m. Karen picks up the bag, opens the door, and disappears inside the cellar. Rachel paused the video. This footage alone destroys her entire defense. She claimed the door was unlocked. The video shows her forcing it open with a crowbar. That's breaking and entering under Tennessee Code annotated section 3914402. What about her claim that I lured her inside? I asked. Rachel clicked to the next folder. That's where it gets even worse for her. The false police report 3 days. After her arrest, Karen had filed a supplemental police report claiming I had lured her into the cellar as part of a premeditated plan to trap her. The report, filed on April 26, stated, on April 23rd, I was conducting a routine inspection of properties near Meadowbrook Estates when I noticed the door to Mr. Cassidy's root cellar was open. Mr. Cassidy was standing near the entrance and gestured for me to come inside, stating he had something to show me regarding HOA concerns. Once I entered, he immediately exited, locked the door, and refused to release me for over 90 minutes. Rachel slid the report across the table. She claimed you were already there, that you invited her in, that the door was open. I wasn't even home when she broke in. Exactly. The security footage proves it. At 10:18 a.m., you were still in town. Your truck doesn't appear in the driveway until 12:04 p.m., over an hour and a half after she broke in. She was alone. The door was locked, and you never invited her anywhere. Rachel pulled up the footage again, this time showing my truck pulling into the driveway at 12:04 p.m. This is a false police report. That's a Class A misdemeanor under Tennessee law. She's facing additional charges for this. The text messages Rachel. Open the next folder text messages between Karen and a friend named Diane Mitchell, another Meadowbrook Estates resident. The messages had been subpoenaed from Karen's phone. Records during discovery. Text message March 25th, 9:42 p.m. Karen. I checked out the root cellar on the Cassidy property today. It's perfect for storage. It's completely unused. Diane, did you ask him if you could use it? Karen, not yet. But if I just start using it and he doesn't notice, I can claim it's abandoned property after a while. Worth a shot. Diane, are you sure that's legal? Karen, if I use it long enough, I can claim adverse possession. It's a legit legal principle. Look it up. Rachel tapped the printout. She wasn't planning a one-time inspection. She was planning long-term, unauthorized use of your property with the intent to eventually claim ownership. How did she even get onto my property in March? I asked. Rachel pulled another document from the folder security footage timestamps from my driveway camera. March 25th to 18 p.m. Karen's vehicle is recorded driving slowly past your property. She stops for approximately 4 minutes near your driveway entrance, then leaves. She was scouting Karen's photos. Evidence of prior trespassing. Rachel opened the folder containing the 60-plus photos Karen had taken inside the root cellar on April 23rd. These photos were taken on her phone, Rachel said. But when we examined the metadata, the hidden information embedded in each image file, we found something interesting. She pulled up a spreadsheet showing the metadata for each photo. Date, time, GPS coordinates, device ID. Most of the photos were taken on April 23rd between 10:22 a.m. and 11:58 a.m. while she was inside the cellar. But look at these, she highlighted. 3 photos at the top of the list. Photo number 1, March 28th, 3:47 p.m. location. Inside root cellar image. Wide shot of shelves. Empty floor space. Photo number 2, April 10th, 11:23 a.m. location. Inside root cellar image. Close-up of wooden support beams. Photo number 3, April 15th, 2:05 p.m. location. Inside root cellar image. Filing cabinet and corners. She'd been inside your cellar at least 3 times before April 23rd, Rachel said. She wasn't conducting a one-time safety inspection. She'd been trespassing repeatedly for weeks. I stared at the photos, anger rising in my chest. I had no idea. She was testing you, seeing if you'd notice. When you didn't, she got bolder. Karen's lies to neighbors during discovery. Rachel had deposed 3 Meadowbrook Estates residents who'd interacted with Karen about my property. One of them, a woman named Sandra. Cole had provided a statement that was particularly damning. Rachel read from the deposition transcript. Rachel, Ms. Cole, did Karen Pritchard ever discuss Mr. Cassidy's root cellar with you? Sandra, yes. About a month before she was arrested, she told me the HOA was going to start using it for storage. Rachel, did she say Mr. Cassidy had given permission? Sandra, yes. She said he'd agreed to let us use it since he wasn't using it himself. She said it was a neighborly arrangement. Rachel, did you ever see any written agreement? Sandra? No, but I trusted Karen. She was the compliance officer. I assumed she'd worked it out. Rachel closed the transcript. Karen told multiple neighbors. She had your permission. She fabricated an agreement that didn't exist. That's fraud. Why would she do that? Because she wanted community support when she started using your property. If neighbors thought it was legitimate, they wouldn't question her. And if you ever objected, she could claim the community had been relying on the arrangement and you were being unreasonable. The journal entries. Rachel opened the final folder photocopies of Karen's journal, seized during the search warrant execution. There were 4 entries related to my property. March 18th, the root cellar on the Cassidy. Property is perfect for storage. It's clearly abandoned. He never uses it. If I can start storing HOA equipment there without him noticing, we might be able to claim adverse possession after a few years. Worth exploring. March 29th. Checked out the cellar again today. No sign of recent use. Took some photos to document. The space. I think we can make this work. April 11th. Cassidy still hasn't noticed I've been in the cellar. He's never home during the day. If I'm careful, I can use this space indefinitely. April 22nd, one day before the incident. Planning to do a full inventory of the cellar tomorrow. Need to figure out how much HOA equipment we can store there. If Cassidy asks, I'll say I was doing a safety inspection. He won't push back. Rachel looked at me. She documented everything. The intent, the planning, the repeated trespassing. And she had a cover story ready if you caught her, which I did. Exactly. And when her cover story didn't work, she escalated. 2 false accusations and a lawsuit. Rachel leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. Here's where we stand. The criminal case against Karen is airtight. Breaking and entering, criminal trespass, filing a false police report. The DA is moving forward with all charges. What about her lawsuit against me? It's going to be dismissed. She has no case. You detained a trespasser who'd broken into your property with a weapon. That's legal under Tennessee law. And her false police report claiming you lured her inside is contradicted by your security footage showing you weren't even home when she broke in. So we win. We win. We're countersuing for property damage, legal fees, and defamation. She lied to. The media filed a false police report and dragged your name through the mud. That's actionable. I left Rachel's office that afternoon with a sense of grim satisfaction. Karen. Pritchard had broken into my property 3 times before I caught her. She'd lied to her neighbors, telling them I'd given her permission. She'd planned to claim adverse possession of my cellar if I didn't notice her using it. She'd filed a false police report claiming I'd lured her inside event, though the security footage proved I wasn't home, and she'd sued me for $150,000. Knowing her entire story was a lie, but the evidence didn't lie. The security footage showed her breaking in with a crowbar. The text messages showed her planning to claim my property. The journal entries showed premeditation and intent, and the false police report showed desperation. Karen had gambled that I wouldn't have proof. She'd gambled that the media and the community would believe her version of events. She'd gambled that she could intimidate me into settling or backing down. She was wrong on every count. The criminal trial was scheduled for September, and Karen Pritchard was about to face the consequences of every lie she'd told. The criminal hearing was scheduled for September 12th at 9 a.m. in the Williamson County Criminal Court. Before Judge Patricia Drummond, Rachel had briefed me on Judge Drummond. The week before, she's been on the bench for 14 years. Former prosecutor. She's fair, but she has zero tolerance for people who lie under oath or waste the court's time with frivolous defenses. What are Karen's chances? Honestly, none. The evidence is overwhelming. But her attorney will try to muddy the waters claim. She had good intentions that she was acting in the community's interest. Don't expect her to go down without a fight. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Wood-paneled walls, rows of benches, a raised bench where Judge Drummond sat. The prosecutor's table was on the left, the defense table on the right. Karen sat next to her attorney, Gerald Foster, wearing a navy blue suit and a tight expression. She didn't look at me when I entered. The gallery was half full of few Meadowbrook Estates residents. A reporter from the Franklin Review and Deputy Carson had been called as a witness. At exactly 9 a.m., the bailiff stood. All rise. Honorable Judge Patricia Drummond, presiding. Judge Drummond entered a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair, sharp eyes, and a nonsense demeanor. She took her seat, opened the case file, and looked at both tables. This is State of Tennessee versus Karen Pritchard. The defendant is charged with criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and filing a false police report. Mr. Foster, how does your client plead? Gerald Foster stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. Noted. Mr. Harris, you may proceed. The prosecutor, a man named David Harris, stood and addressed the court. He was in his early 40s, methodical and calm. Your Honor, the evidence in this case is clear and undisputed. On April 23rd, the defendant unlawfully entered the victim's property, forced open a locked structure with a crowbar, and refused to leave when confronted. She then filed a false police report claiming the victim had lured her inside. The state will prove each element of the charges. Beyond a reasonable doubt, Harris's first witness was Deputy Carson. Carson took the stand and was sworn in. Harris. Deputy Carson, can you describe what you found when you responded to the 911 call? On April 23rd, Carson, I arrived at the property at approximately 12:18 p.m. The complainant, Mr. Cassidy, stated he'd found the defendant inside his root cellar without permission. He'd locked her inside and called us. When I opened the door, the defendant was highly agitated, claiming she'd been trapped for hours. Harris, how long had she actually been inside? Carson, based on the 911 call timestamp and my arrival time, approximately 17 minutes. Harris, did the defendant claim she had permission to be on the property? Carson, no. She claimed she was conducting an HOA safety inspection. I asked if the property was under HOA jurisdiction. She said no. I asked if she had the owner's permission. She said no. Harris, what did you do? Carson, I arrested her for criminal trespass. Harris's second exhibit was the security footage. He played it on a large screen facing the judge. The courtroom fell silent as the video showed Karen pulling up to my property, retrieving the crowbar from her bag, forcing open the lock, and entering the cellar. The timestamp in the corner was clear, 10:18 a.m. April 23rd. Harris paused the video, Your Honor. This footage shows the defendant using a crowbar to force open a locked door. That's breaking and entering under Tennessee Code 391-4402. Judge Drummond made a note. Continue. Harris played the second clip, my truck pulling into the driveway at 12:04 p.m., nearly 2 hours after Karen had broken in. This footage contradicts the defendant's police report, filed on April 26th, in which she claimed Mr. Cassidy was present when she arrived and invited her inside. As the video shows, Mr. Cassidy was not home when the defendant broke in. She was alone. Harris's third exhibit was Karen's journal. He read the March 18th entry aloud. The root cellar on the Cassidy property is perfect for storage. It's clearly abandoned. He never uses it. If I can start storing HOA equipment there without him noticing, I might be able to claim adverse possession after a few years. Worth exploring, Harris looked at the judge. This entry, written 5 weeks before the incident, shows premeditation and intent. The defendant wasn't conducting a safety inspection. She was planning to unlawfully occupy the victim's property. Gerald. Foster cross-examined Deputy Carson, but there wasn't much to challenge. Carson's testimony was straightforward and supported by his own report. Foster's defense strategy became clear during his opening statement. Paint Karen as a concerned community. Member who'd made a mistake in judgment? Your Honor, Foster said. My client is a dedicated HOA compliance officer who has served her community for over 6 years. On April 23rd, she observed what she believed to be a dangerous structure on a property near her community. Out of genuine concern for public safety, she entered the structure to assess the risk. She did not intend to trespass. She did not intend to cause harm. She made an error in judgment, but that error does not constitute criminal intent. Judge Drummond looked unimpressed. Mr. Foster, your client forced open a locked door with a crowbar. How does that demonstrate lack of intent? Foster hesitated. The door was difficult to open, Your Honor. My client believed it was stuck, not locked. The security footage shows her inserting a crowbar into the latch and prying it open. That's not opening a stuck door. That's forcing entry. Foster didn't respond. Karen took the stand in her own defense. She was sworn in and sat down. Her hands folded in her lap. Her expression carefully neutral. Foster walked her through her version of events. She'd been driving past my property. Noticed the root cellar, became concerned about its condition, decided to inspect it. Foster: Miss Pritchard, why did you enter the cellar without Mr. Cassidy's permission? Karen: I was concerned about safety. The structure is old, deteriorating. I wanted to document the hazards so I could file a report with the county. Foster: Did you intend to trespass? Karen: No. I thought I was acting in the community's interest. Foster: Did you intend to harm Mr. Cassidy? Karen: Of course not. Judge Drummond leaned forward. Ms. Pritchard, I have a question for you. Karen straightened. Yes, Your Honor. You testified that you were concerned about safety, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you brought a crowbar with you. Karen hesitated. The door was stocked. The security footage shows you forcing it open with a crowbar. Why did you bring a crowbar if you thought the door would be unlocked? Karen's face flushed. I didn't know if it would be locked or not. I brought tools in case I needed them. So you broke in with a crowbar out of concern for public safety. I didn't break in. You forced open a locked door on someone else's property without permission. What would you call that? Karen didn't answer. Judge Drummond leaned back. Mr. Foster, does your client have anything else to add? Foster stood. No, Your Honor. Judge Drummond took less than 10 minutes to deliver her ruling. The evidence is clear. The defendant unlawfully entered the victim's property, forced open a locked structure with a tool, and refused to leave when confronted. She then filed a false police report claiming she'd been invited inside. Despite video evidence showing she was alone when she broke in, Judge Drummond looked at Karen. Ms. Pritchard, you claim you were acting in the community's interest. Your journal entries show you planned to use the victim's property for HOA storage without permission. Your text messages show you discussed claiming adverse possession. And your own photos show you'd been trespassing multiple times before you were caught. Karen stared at the table, her jaw tight. The ruling: criminal trespass, guilty. Sentenced to 12 months probation, breaking and entering, guilty. Fine $2,500, filing a false police report, guilty. Fined $1,000. Restitution: $850 for damaged lock and door frame. Judge Drummond closed the file. Ms. Pritchard, you broke into someone's property with a crowbar. You lied to the police. And you wasted this court's time with a defense that was contradicted by your own journal. Consider yourself fortunate that the state didn't press burglary charges, the civil trial. Karen's lawsuit against me for false imprisonment was held 3 weeks later on October 4th. The trial lasted 1 day. The jury consisted of 8 people, for men, for women, from Williamson County. Rachel presented the same evidence: security footage, the journal entries, the text messages, the false police report. She called me as a witness. I testified about finding Karen in my cellar, telling her to leave, and locking her in when she refused. Rachel asked, Mr. Cassidy, why did you lock the door? Because she refused to leave and I didn't want her to flee before the police arrived. She'd broken into my property. I had the right to detain her. Did you harm her in any way? No, I locked a door. That's it. Gerald Foster tried to argue that locking the door constituted false imprisonment and that I should have simply called the police without detaining her. Rachel's rebuttal was simple. Under Tennessee Code 391-1614, a property owner has the right to use reasonable force to detain a trespasser to prevent them from fleeing. Locking a door is reasonable force. Ms. Pritchard broke into his property. He secured her until police arrived. That's not false imprisonment. That's citizen's arrest. The jury deliberated for 45 minutes. Verdict: Karen's claim dismissed. She must pay my legal fees. $18,000. Judge Drummond's final words, delivered after the verdict, were direct and unsparing. Miss Pritchard, you broke into Mr. Cassidy's property with a crowbar. He had every right to secure you until police arrived. You're lucky he didn't press burglary charges. Your lawsuit was frivolous, your defense was dishonest, and you've wasted this court's time and resources. Case dismissed. Karen stood, her face pale, and left the courtroom without looking back. I walked out with Rachel into the afternoon sunlight. It's over, Rachel said. She's convicted. She's paying restitution and your legal fees, and her reputation is destroyed. I nodded. Karen Pritchard had broken into my root cellar with a crowbar. She'd lied to the police, lied to her neighbors, and sued me for $150,000, and she'd lost every charge. Every claim. Every lie. The judge had made it clear. You can't break into someone's property and claim you were helping. You can't file false police reports and expect to get away with it. And you can't sue the person who stopped you from committing a crime Karen had gambled that her lies would be. Believed she was wrong, and now she was paying the price. Karen filed an appeal 2 weeks after the criminal conviction. Rachel called me on October 18th to let me know. She's appealing both the criminal conviction and the civil judgment. It's a waste of time and money, but she has the right. What are her grounds? She's claiming the trial court erred in admitting the security footage, and that her constitutional rights were violated when you locked her in the cellar. Neither argument has merit. How long does an appeal take? 6 to 9 months? But I'll be shocked if it's not dismissed. While Karen's appeal was pending, security footage became public. The Franklin Review obtained it through a public records request and published it online on October 22nd with the headline, Video Shows HOA Officer Breaking into Neighbor's Property with Crowbar. The video went viral locally. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 50,000 times and shared across multiple community Facebook groups. The comments were brutal. She lied. She said the door was unlocked. The video shows her breaking in with a crowbar. I signed the petition supporting her. I feel like an idiot. She told us he trapped her for hours. She was in there for 17 minutes. Everything she said was a lie. How was she not in jail for burglary? The Meadowbrook Estates, HOA Facebook page, which had been filled with Procrin posts for months, completely flipped. Post October 23rd, 8:14 a.m. I owe Ben Cassidy an apology. I attended the rally. I held a support Karen sign. I believed her when she said she was the victim. I was wrong. The video proved she broke into his property. She lied to all of us. The post had over 200 comments, most of them echoing the same sentiment. I'm sorry for attacking you online, Mr. Cassidy. You were defending your property, and we vilified you for it. Karen destroyed her own credibility. This is on her. We should have demanded proof before taking sides. Several people sent me direct apology emails. One woman, Sandra Cole, the neighbor who testified in Karen's deposition, wrote, Mr. Cassidy, I'm deeply sorry. Karen told me you'd given her permission to use the cellar. I believed her. I defended her publicly. I was wrong. You had every right to protect your property, and I'm ashamed I didn't see through her lies sooner. I replied to each apology the same way. Thank you. I appreciate the acknowledgement. No hard feelings. On November 3rd, the Williamson County District Attorney's Office filed additional charges against Karen for the false police report. The original fine had been $1,000, part of the criminal sentencing, but the DA reviewed the case and determined that Karen's false report claiming I had lured her into the cellar had wasted significant law enforcement resources and warranted enhanced penalties. Karen was fined an additional $3,500 and ordered to complete 100 hours of community service. Rachel forwarded me the order. She keeps digging herself deeper. If she just accepted responsibility after the first conviction, this would be over. But she's fighting everything. It's costing her more each time. I spent the first week of November upgrading security on the property. I hired a contractor to install a reinforced steel lock on the root cellar door, commercial grade, picker resistant, with a hardened steel hasp. No one was forcing that door open again without power tools. I also installed a complete security camera system. 8 cameras covering every angle of the property, motion activated with night vision and cloud storage. The cameras fed to an app on my phone so I could monitor the property from anywhere. Motion sensors were placed along the driveway, near the root cellar, and at the barn. Any movement triggered an alert. The contractor finished the work on November 8th. Total cost: $4,200. Rachel had already added it to the restitution claim. Karen's paying for this. Hey, she created the need for enhanced security. That's a direct cost of her criminal activity. Karen's reputation in Meadowbrook Estates was destroyed. On November 12th, the HOA board held a vote to remove her as compliance officer. The vote was unanimous, 7-0. The board sent a formal letter to all residents. Effective immediately, Karen Pritchard has been removed from her position as HOA compliance officer. The board has determined that her recent actions, including criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and filing false police reports, are incompatible with the trust and integrity required for this role. We apologize to the community for any harm caused by her actions. 2 days later, Karen was also removed from the Meadowbrook Estates' neighborhood watch. The watch captain, a retired firefighter named Tom Brennan, sent an email to the watch members. Karen Pritchard is no longer a member of the neighborhood watch. Her criminal conviction and documented pattern of trespassing make her unsuitable for a role focused on community, safety, and trust. Karen's appeal was denied on March 15th. The Tennessee Court of Criminal Appeals issued a brief opinion. The trial court did not err in admitting the security footage, which was properly authenticated and relevant to the charges. The defendant's claim that her detention in the root cellar violated her constitutional rights is without merit. Property owner acted within his legal authority under Tennessee Code 391-1614 to detain a trespasser until law enforcement arrived. The conviction is affirmed. Rachel called me with the news. It's over. She's out of options. The conviction stands. The restitution stands. She still owes you $18,000 in legal fees from the civil case. Has she paid any of it? Not yet. We'll start garnishment proceedings if she doesn't pay within 30 days. In late April, I heard through Ed that Karen's house in Meadowbrook Estates had been listed for sale. I pulled up the listing online. The photos showed a well-maintained two-story home with a finished basement, listed at $475,000. The listing had been active for 3 days. Ed sent me a text. She's leaving. Can't stay after everything that happened. Karen sold the house 6 weeks later, $458,000 below asking price, and moved out in early June. I never saw her again. But the story didn't end there. In mid-July, I received a call from Tom Brennan, the neighborhood watch captain. Ben, you've got a minute? I need to talk to you about something. Sure. What's going on? We've been doing a security audit of the neighborhood after everything that happened with Karen, and we found something disturbing. What? Karen had been systematically trespassing on multiple properties in Meadowbrook Estates, not just yours. We found evidence she'd entered at least 4 other residents' sheds, garages, and storage buildings over the past 2 years, claiming community oversight. I sat down. She was breaking into other people's property. Yes, one resident found photos on Karen's old HOA laptop pictures she'd taken inside his garage without permission. Another resident checked his security footage and found Karen entering his shed last summer. She told him she was inspecting for code violations, but he never gave her permission. Did anyone report it? No, most people didn't realize it had happened until we started asking questions. Karen had convinced a lot of residents that she had authority to inspect their property. She didn't. She was just breaking in and calling it compliance. Jesus. We're filing reports with the sheriff's office. I wanted to give you a heads up in case they contact you for your case file. Turns out you weren't the only one she targeted. You were just the only one who caught her and pressed charges. I sat on my porch that evening, looking out at the root cellar. The new steel lock gleamed in the fading sunlight. The security cameras were mounted on poles, their red indicator lights blinking steadily. Karen Pritchard had broken into my property with a crowbar, planning to claim it through adverse possession. When I'd caught her, she'd lied to the police, lied to the media, and sued me for $150,000. She'd been convicted on all charges, fined $4,350, ordered to pay $18,000 in legal fees, and sentenced to probation and community service. Her appeal had been denied. Her reputation had been destroyed. She'd been removed from every leadership position she'd held, and she'd been forced to sell her home and leave the community. But the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was that I hadn't been her only victim. Karen had been systematically trespassing on her neighbors' properties. For years, breaking into sheds, garages, and storage buildings, photographing people's belongings, and calling it community oversight. She'd convinced people she had authority she didn't have. She'd exploited trust to violate privacy, and she'd gotten away with it until I'd locked her in that cellar and called the police. Tom Brennan called me again 2 weeks later. Thought you'd want to know the sheriff's office is investigating Karen for additional trespass charges. 4 residents have filed complaints. They found more photos on her devices. Looks like she'd been doing this since 2022. Will they press charges? 2 of them are. The other 2 just want to move on. Good. She needs to face consequences for all of it. Agreed.
And Ben, thank you.
If you hadn't caught her and pressed charges, she'd still be doing this. You stopped her. I stood at the root cellar door one evening in late July.
Running my hand over the new steel lock.
Karen Pritchard had thought my cellar was wasted space. She'd thought she could use it without my permission and eventually claim it as her own. She'd thought she had authority to trespass on private property in the name of community oversight. She was wrong, and now she was gone, her reputation destroyed, her home sold, her criminal record permanent. The cellar was locked, the cameras were watching, and no one was trespassing on my property again. Because Karen had learned the hard way what I'd known all along. You can't break into someone's property and call it helping. You can't lie to the police and expect to get away with it. And you can't sue the person who stopped you from committing a crime. Karen had tried all 3, and she'd lost everything. I stood at the root cellar door on a warm evening in early August, my hand resting on the new steel lock. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the property. The security cameras mounted on their poles blinked steadily, their red indicator lights barely visible in the fading light. The root cellar looked the same as it always had, stone walls built into the hillside. Heavy wooden door, iron hinges, darkened with age. But everything had changed. Karen Pritchard had broken into this cellar with a crowbar on April 23rd, thinking she could use my property without permission, and I'd locked her inside and called the police. I thought about Karen, about the confidence in her voice when I'd found her inside the cellar, taking photos, refusing to leave. I have every right to ensure you're not creating hazards.
Ow.
She'd actually believed that. She convinced herself that being HOA compliance officer gave her authority over properties outside her jurisdiction. That community concern justified breaking and entering, that my cellar was wasted space. She had more right to it than I did. Karen had thought unused space equaled abandoned property. She thought that because I wasn't using the cellar every day because I only went down there once or twice a month to store supplies, it was fair game for her to claim. Her journal entries had made that clear. It's clearly abandoned. He never uses it. But unused isn't abandoned. Empty isn't available. And someone else's property doesn't become yours just because you want it more than they're using it. Karen had thought community oversight justified trespassing. She'd broken into my cellar 3 times before. I caught her March 28th, April 10th, April 15th, taking photos, measuring space, planning how to use it for HOA storage. And she'd done the same thing to at least 4 other neighbors in Meadowbrook Estates. Entering their sheds and garages without permission, photographing their belongings, calling it compliance inspections. She'd convinced herself and convinced others that she had authority she didn't have. That being on the HOA board gave her the right to enter private property, that safety concerns overrode the need for warrants, it's permission, or basic respect. For boundaries she was wrong. Karen had thought she could lie her way out of consequences. When I'd locked her in the cellar and called 911, she'd screamed that I'd assaulted her, that I'd trapped her for hours, that she couldn't breathe. The reality. She'd been inside for 17 minutes in a ventilated stone structure. Perfectly safe. When the police arrived, she'd lied again. Claimed the door was unlocked. Claimed she'd had implied access. Claimed she was just trying to help the community. The security footage proved otherwise. And when her arrest didn't go away, she doubled down, filed a false police report claiming I'd lured her inside, sued me for $150,000 for false imprisonment, told the media. I was dangerous and unstable. Every lie had been exposed. Every claim had been dismissed. Every gamble had failed. The criminal conviction had been swift. And unambiguous, Judge Drummond had seen through Karen's defense in minutes. The security footage, the journal entries, the text messages planning to claim adverse possession, it all added up to one thing. Premeditated trespassing with intent to unlawfully occupy someone else's property. Karen had been convicted on all charges. Criminal trespass, breaking and entering, filing a false police report. She'd been sentenced to 12 months probation, fined $4,350, and ordered to pay $850 in restitution for the lock and door frame she'd damaged. And when she'd sued me for false imprisonment, the jury had dismissed her claim in less than an hour and ordered her to pay my legal fees. $18,000. Judge Drummond's words had been clear. You broke into his property. He had every right to secure you until police arrived. You're lucky he didn't press burglary charges. I thought about the day I'd found Karen in the cellar. The shock of seeing her standing there, the audacity of her refusal to leave, the decision I'd made in that moment. I could have let her walk out. I could have called the police and hoped they'd catch her before she disappeared. I could have avoided the confrontation entirely, but I didn't, because Karen had broken into my property and I had the right to stop her. Under Tennessee law, property owner has the authority to detain a trespasser using reasonable force to prevent them from fleeing until law enforcement arrives. Locking a door is an assault. It's securing a criminal until the authorities arrive. Karen had called it false imprisonment. She'd claimed I'd violated her rights, endangered her life, acted with malice. The judge had called it exactly what it was. Lawful detention of a trespasser caught in the act. I walked down the stone steps into the cellar, flipping on the light. The space was exactly as I'd left it. Shelves lined with mason jars, boxes of emergency supplies, tools hanging on the wall, the old filing cabinet in the corner. Nothing special. Nothing valuable. Just storage, but it was mine, and Karen had thought she could take it. She'd written in her journal about claiming adverse possession. She'd texted her friend about using the space long enough to call it abandoned. She'd told her neighbors I'd given her permission when I hadn't. She'd planned it. She'd executed it. And when she'd been caught, she'd lied about it. Karen's mistake wasn't just breaking into my cellar, it was believing that her intentions mattered more than my rights. She'd convinced herself that because she wanted to use the space for community purposes, it was justified. That because I wasn't using it the way she thought I should, it was wasteful for me to keep it. But property rights don't work that way. You don't get to decide what's wasted on someone else's land. You don't get to trespass because you think you have a better use for someone's property, and you don't get to break in with a crowbar and call it helping. Karen had lost everything. Her position as HOA compliance officer gone. Her role in the neighborhood watch gone. Her reputation in Meadowbrook Estates destroyed. Her appeal denied. Her home sold below asking price. Because she couldn't stay in a community that knew what she'd done, and the investigation into her systematic trespassing on other neighbors' properties was still ongoing, with additional charges likely coming, all because she'd thought my root cellar was hers to use. All because she'd thought community oversight justified breaking and entering. All because she'd thought she could lie her way out of consequences. When she got caught, I locked the cellar door behind me, the new steel lock clicking into place with a solid, satisfying sound. The cameras watched. The motion sensors waited. The property was secure. Karen Pritchard had broken into my root cellar on April 23rd. I'd locked the door and called the cops. She'd called it false imprisonment. The judge called it securing a criminal until authorities arrived. Karen had thought she could break into someone's property and claim she was helping. She'd thought unused space meant abandoned property. She'd thought community concern justified trespassing. She learned the hard way that she was wrong. Because trespassing is a crime even if your intentions are good. Breaking and entering is a crime even if you're on an HOA board. And filing false police reports is a crime even if you're trying to cover up your mistakes. I stood at the edge of my property. Looking back at the root cellar in the fading light, Karen had been convicted. Fined, ordered to pay restitution in legal fees. Removed from every position of authority she'd held. Forced to sell her home and leave, and she'd learned a lesson she should have known from the beginning. Can't break into someone's property and claim you were helping. Karen tried. She got arrested, convicted, and ordered to pay my legal fees. Her appeal was denied. Her reputation was destroyed. Her home was sold. And now, every time she thinks about that root cellar, the one she thought was wasted space, the one she broke into with a crowbar, the one I locked her inside while I called the police, she remembered break into someone's property. They have every right to lock the door until the cops arrive. Karen crossed the line, and she paid the price. The root cellar was mine. The property was mine. And no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not anyone claiming community oversight was ever taking it from me. Because boundaries matter, locks matter. And when someone breaks into your property, you have every right to secure them until the authorities arrive, Karen learned. That lesson the hard way, and I made sure she'd never forget it.